Welcome to the Mental Health Mukbang. We're back. I'm Jeanie Chang, LMFT from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I am eating today Korean kimbap. I started because I was starving, and rice cake. It's like a dessert that we eat. So, see the crumbs? Yes, I did start.
I'm Christopher Vo. I'm normally based out of Houston, Texas. Right now, I'm out Destin, Florida, right after a hurricane, so that's nice. I made myself some pasta, hot sausage, and what is it? Cauliflower mash. Trying to be healthy-ish.
Nice, nice. I guess I'll go. My name's Jed. I'm a therapist based out of LA, and today I have a banh mi. Well, actually, it's not a banh mi. It's a baguette, but it's like, yeah, whatever.
Wait, it's not banh mi? It doesn't have meat inside?
Hold on, like a banh mi is supposed to be like, I thought a banh. Well, technically it is a banh mi, right? Because a banh mi is just a sandwich, but it's not like the loaf kind of sandwich. Dude, Chris, you got like rice on. You got like cauliflower mash on your chin, dude.
Oh, really? Nice.
Let Jenny introduce herself.
All right. So I'm Jenny Wang. I'm a clinical psychologist in Houston, Texas, and I have again a kind bar because it's 2 o'clock here, and it's the dark chocolate cherry cashew.
You healthy folk. I guess this is not unhealthy. Well, so anyway, figure out your banh mi, but I thought banh mi was a Vietnamese sandwich.
Yeah,
me too.
So technically it's a banh mi, but then like they make a distinction at the Vietnamese restaurants here between like a banh mi and a baguette. So a banh mi usually is like a loaf, and then like a baguette has the same filling except it's in a baguette. So
see, we're not that fancy.
Yeah, I was gonna say only in LA.
Yeah, we don't have that many options.
Yeah,
we should ask the Vietnamese guy. What does the Vietnamese guy say?
You let us know, viewers.
Yeah,
well, anyways,
I have no idea.
We're gonna talk. We're not just talking about food, but yes, we're eating it. We're talking about anxiety today. Mainly, basically, because that could be many, many episodes, but mainly, what is anxiety? We'll do an anxiety overview. What does it look like? Symptoms, etc. So, and I'm sure we all have a different explanation, but we'll be on the same page of what is anxiety. So Jed just took a bite. Let's go with Chris because he's waiting eagerly to answer the question.
Yeah. Well, I work with anxiety a lot, and I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that anxiety is like a dirty word, right? And what I explain to my clients is that anxiety is normal, it's natural, it exists in all of us, but it just exists on a spectrum, right? There's a healthy amount of anxiety that you can have. And the example that I always use is in my master's program, right? When we had to write our final thesis, I suffer from not having a lot of anxiety, which means that when I had to turn in my 20-page thesis, I turned in 13 pages and said, you know what, whatever. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to get an A in this class. I don't really care, right? Where my now director, her 20-page essay was 46 pages, and she was very anxious about her grade for weeks. And I was like, you graduated. You have an A. You're definitely going to have an A. You're going to be fine, right? But a healthy level of anxiety exists somewhere in between, where you're proofreading it, you're checking your resources, you're making sure you have the correct number of pages and are getting everything you want in there. So it's just knowing that it exists on a spectrum. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's not just a disorder, right?
I like that. I'll go along that. I do also work with a lot of anxiety, and I talk about it a lot, even in organizations. And I like the way that you said it's not a dirty word. It's also, there's some stigma even when you say anxiety, right? So I try to normalize that word saying, and I say it constantly going, anxious. You're anxious. You're feeling anxious. What's wrong with saying that? In fact, I say the more you say it, the more awareness, the more acceptance, which is very much needed to manage your anxiety. And the key thing I say, just like as you said, it's a part of our human experience. It's a reaction to stress. Life is stressful. Of course, it's also joyful, but with so much uncertainty, not just now, just in general, we can't predict our life at all, that any anxiousness we feel would be normal depending on our circumstances. Because I hear a lot from clients, I don't know why I would feel this way, or I don't know why I'm anxious, and what I try to do is, because they're almost questioning their own anxiety and whether or not that's normal. So I say, well, why would you question why you're feeling anxious? Because something's making you anxious. What is it? Right. So exactly. I try to normalize that word. And it is, like I said, and my anxiety. I'll talk about growing up in my home. The way I felt it was in the family, which is a whole nother angle of what anxiety can look like. And it was more in what was not being said. So for me, I had that anxious feeling of I wanted things to be a little bit more obvious. So what I do is now try to speak up on it more. It's very silent in our culture, but that can also spur on anxiety. But what it's made me do is actually be better off in sharing my feelings. So it also helps you develop that resilience. And it's, again, a part of our human experience. And the more you like, and it's about how we manage it. It's not about experience, not about feeling it, how well we manage it, you know? So.
And your anxiety is trying to tell you something, right? That's
Yeah.
what we work a lot on in therapy, is that stop fighting your emotions and start learning what it's trying to tell you. How do the two of you guys see anxiety in your clients, Jeanie or Jed?
I think the way y'all have presented it is very similar. And I think I would even push it a step further that if we lost the ability to experience anxiety, life would be really dangerous. Right. So if you're driving on the highway and a car is about to hit you and you feel no anxiety whatsoever, you're not going to react in time to save your life. Right. So it plays a really important survival function. Now, I always say that when the anxiety so it's kind of, I always present it as like fear, right, that has an action that can be, tied to it, can dissipate anxiety. But fear that has no action, right, no way to address it, then can fuel anxiety. And so, right, when back then our ancestors, a tiger was chasing them, or whatever animal was in Asia, I guess, like that anxiety caused them to react and respond. And once the threat was gone, they could then re-regulate and the anxiety would go away. But in modern day, we feel fear in all these different contexts, but we may not be able to do anything about it. And so we then have to sit with that anxiety. And when it goes haywire, we start to ruminate. We start to feel it in our bodies. It starts to culminate into this stress response that is prolonged. And that's when it becomes detrimental. So it's kind of like that dose response curve, the Yerkes Dodson, y'all remember that? Where like it's an inverted U, and then the bottom, right, is anxiety and then performance. Right. So it's like as anxiety builds, it's adaptive, it's helping with performance. And then at some point it tips over and it's no longer helpful anymore. And so that's kind of how I presented that it's important. And we're not trying to make it go away. We're trying to teach you how to harness it and relate to it differently so that it doesn't trigger you as much. And you feel like you know what to do with it.
I have nothing to add. Just kidding.
No.
Yeah.
Jed, show us your sandwich though, because that looked pretty luxurious.
Luxurious?
Yeah, I don't know. I was eyeing it. I was listening to Jeanie, but eyeing the sandwich.
I'm going to show you the sandwich.
Turn it.
This is a mukbang after all.
Hold on.
So
Yeah,
good.
like it looks like.
Is that ham?
It's
salmon?
ham, meatloaf, and head cheese.
So that's not a banh mi.
See what?
That's an Italian sub. I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure there was French influence when it came to making these sandwiches and why they sell them
Right.
at Vietnamese
Look,
restaurants.
Sorry, I distracted you. You were going to answer what is anxiety.
And I'm pretty sure, like, I don't know. I feel like head cheese is more so like an Asian thing.
Oh.
I don't know. That's a good question. Do you guys normally like? I don't know. I feel like head cheese is like a normal thing for me because I'm Asian, but I don't know if other.
No, I don't particularly enjoy head cheese. It's gross to me.
I don't even know what that is.
Piece of meat and congeal it into a log and then slice it, right?
Yeah.
Oil like the head of a pig.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the skin and the cartilage and the fat. It's all like.
Obviously, I don't eat that because I don't even know what it was.
I like it. But in any case,
Anxiety.
anxiety, right? So anxiety
It
is,
helps.
I explain it very much like Jenny explains it, right? It's a survival response. It's a physiological thing that everybody experiences. Without it, we can't function properly. Because anxiety alerts us to danger. It tells us something. Like the rest of our emotions, it tells us something, right? So for anxiety, it is the response to a stressor, right? And like Jenny was saying earlier, I with a lot of my clients who experience anxiety, they feel like, oh, like I just want it to go away. And it's important for me to explain to them, like, hey, you don't want it to go away, because I'm very much like Chris. Like there were times where I just don't feel that anxiety, and you just kind of don't care about things that you should care about. And you're just
What's that
like,
like?
oh, I need to, I don't know,
You can
buy
rub
health
off.
insurance. I'm like, you know, it's one of those things.
Hilarious.
So,
I love that.
so yeah, like you
We'll rub off
recognize
on
its
each other.
importance, but you're just kind of like, well, it's supposed to be important, but I don't feel the anxiety that I should in order to kind of go and address that, right?
Sure.
And so not having anxiety, or not having a certain threshold for anxiety, sometimes can be detrimental. And so um, a lot of it is just explaining, like, hey, like just because you feel anxious a lot and sometimes it's impairing your functioning, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing, right? It just means that we need to find
Right.
ways to help make it so that it's not quite as, I mean, detrimental for whatever your particular experience is. So it definitely is, like Chris said, it's a very spectrum oriented thing. Different people have different levels of stress that they can tolerate, and stress that helps them to function. A lot of the time, it's just really figuring out what works for you, right? Me and Chris can kind of function when it comes to having this lowered stress response when it comes to certain things, right? And we make it work for us. For other people, it's probably it probably doesn't, right? And so it's just figuring out where you are in terms of what you can and can't accept in terms of that stress. And I think that's the way that I usually explain that to my clients, right? So yes.
So I have something to say. First of all, I think it's a good match because I'm just the reason why I'm laughing fondly because I'm so not like that, right? So I really mean it when I say, hey, that'd be great if Jed was rubbing off on me a little bit with the low anxiety. But so I'm gonna, on a flip side though, so let's just say I have my therapist cap on. Surprise, surprise. Sometimes I think, what would you say about? So here's what I tell clients: anxiety. There's like a paradox to it, right? You need to accept anxiety to not let it control you, to disengage from it. I'm not saying you guys are not doing that, but I'm wondering if some of that is that under functioning behavior that we might see when you actually are anxious and there's an avoidant behavior. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I do point that out because that happens also in our culture and anxiety in general, right? You try to avoid it, it's not there, so then you underfunction and that's the low anxiety you're talking about. So that's just me kind of playing devil's advocate. What would you say to that? Is there any of that involved?
Well, I think maybe not necessarily for me, but I do see anxiety paralyze my clients often, right? And there's a book. I don't know if you guys have read it. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. It's an incredibly common book, and it explains anxiety as excitement, essentially, misplaced excitement, right? So the analogy that I use for that is like for an athlete, right? If you've been an athlete and say you're a football player and you're at that line of scrimmage and you're waiting for that ball to snap, right? In that moment, you are subconsciously paying attention to everything around you. The crowd has disappeared, and you're watching the people in front of you. You're watching the way their body reacts. You're looking at the minutia of their behaviors, and you're deeply in tune with timing, and time has kind of slowed down for you, right? But you know where to use your heightened responses. Anxiety does that exact same thing, except you don't know where to place that energy. So a lot of times when clients are feeling anxious, I try to find the root cause. For example, like death anxiety. Death anxiety is a common one, right? So one of my clients, she is avoidant because her dog is 15 years old and She is afraid that when she goes and finds this, walks up to this dog when it's yelping or calling, that it might be passing away, right? And the way that I explain it to her is that her anxiety is telling her that she has a limited amount of time to spend with this dog, right? But because she's allowing it to paralyze her, it's actually worsening the situation as to listening to what it's telling you and spending more quality time with her pet and animal and bonding and making more memories, things like that, right? But too oftentimes people get into that concept of being paralyzed by their anxiety, whether it be from avoidance, like you said, or whether it be analysis paralysis, where you are looking at every option and are paralyzed and unable to make a decision on which route you want to take. Or the toolbox fallacy. The toolbox fallacy is the thought process that if you add this just one more skill, this one more life skill to your toolbox, you'll finally be ready to achieve this or tackle this problem. When the reality is you're never ready. You just kind of have to do it and learn as you go along, right?
That's good. You're talking about the what ifs. I feel like you can go down this snowball, this what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. So I always tell them to replace the what ifs with what is. What is I am healthy. Because the whole what ifs of what if I get sick and
Yeah.
But yeah, so they live in a lot of what ifs, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the idea of grounding, right? Why grounding works for anxiety is because it brings you away from the all of the thoughts, the possibilities, and reminds you what is currently happening, and brings your focus away from the anticipatory, which is what Chris was kind of talking about earlier, like that anticipatory excitement that comes from thinking about the future, right? You're anticipating something that you don't know it, like you can't direct it anywhere. Like when you know something is going to happen, like you have a place to direct that energy to, you have a place to direct your focus. But if you're anticipating something that you don't know is going to happen or not, you just don't know, right? Where is that energy going to go? And that's where that's where anxiety can be very detrimental for a lot of clients, right? Milkus, I have some too.
That.
Favorite flavor is peach for me, though.
Yeah, this is the original. Sorry, distraction, but I never drink this. It's really sweet, but I'm tired if I'm drinking it. Little, like sugar pick me up in the afternoon here.
But yeah, going back to what Jeanie had said earlier, I definitely know that some of mine is some of my behavior is avoidant when it comes to, like, it's an avoidance of a stressor that I know is there, and I just don't like. So for a lot of people who procrastinate, okay, that is also one of the reasons, right? Some of us just have lower stress responses, but for other situations, it's the stress response is so high you just pretend it's not there so you don't deal with it. And I definitely have experienced that in the past. It's not the best way to deal with your anxiety, but some people make it work, myself included. But it is definitely.
Well, you have the awareness, which
yeah.
is good. You're aware of that.
I mean, awareness only brings you so far, though. And I tell my clients that a lot. Like, I'm like, that's great. Yeah, good thing that like, awesome. But it's still kind of interfering with your life. So I think that's something we need to address. But
I did not bring it up to pinpoint that, but I just thought I'd mention that because I see that too, right?
Yeah.
How about you, Jeanie? How does I don't even know what the question was, but how let's talk about how does I'd like to get a little personal. How does anxiety manifest in us? Like, what does that look like? Because Jed kind of got to that point. I'm an overfunctioner. How about you?
I would say I'm an overfunctioner to a point, in the sense that I get to that point and then I'm like, oh, screw it. I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to watch Netflix for the rest of the night. So yes. And I notice when I feel anxious, it often is masked by irritability. So I tend to get angry when I'm anxious, but not realize it until later when my husband's like, what is the deal? Like, what's going on? And then I'm like, actually, I'm really worried about this, this, and this, and this, right? And so that's usually a good indicator that there's something that I'm worrying about, but almost like not processing at a conscious level, not really allowing myself to or having the time and energy to think about it. And so I'm just less patient with people around me.
But I'm glad you shared that, because that was just, we also have to work hard to manage our anxiety. And I'm probably not as irritable, but I tend to overdo stuff like that. Everyone's like watching me like I'm a tornado or a hurricane, and they're like, what's going on? So I make people around me anxious because I'm doing all this stuff to not feel, to basically be like, let me just put all this stuff on my plate and do everything, create whatever, create projects. So I'm technically being avoided in my own way, right? Until I realize, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do all this. And then technically go into the paralysis. Okay, I'm super anxious. I'll just go crawl into bed, you know? But yeah, but I work hard at trying to bring that down. That's why I'm like, Jed, how about we play off each other and work it out where we can balance one another? So I could be, no, but yeah, so it takes a lot of work to
Yeah.
to manage our anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Self-sabotage is another way anxiety can come out, right? Same in that same vein of analysis paralysis and things like that. You fear that rejection so much that you self-sabotage yourself so that you now have an excuse as to why you failed, right? I think that might be why, getting personal, that might be why it took so long for me to move forward with something like this, right? The mukbang, of being afraid of not getting engagement, not, being useful, and people not enjoying what we have to say. So it wasn't until, you, Jeanie and Jenny, approached us and to kind of move forward with this idea that I had ruminating for so long. So
Oh,
anxiety comes up in odd ways in each one of us, and I think it's very important to recognize that, right? Now, when we talk about that, what are some solutions for anxiety? I know grounding is an excellent one. What about exposure? I think a lot of people kind of know the concept of exposure, but how would you guys explain exposure and how that helps anxiety?
Who wants to take it?
okay. Well, I'll give one example. I know there's the popular example of exposure when you have a supernatural scaredness of snakes or something. Well, first of all, who wants to be in front of snakes? That's not a good example. Spiders, and then they expose you more to spiders. I get that. The way I talk about exposure therapy is the more you do something, right? So obviously, in the setting that I am in, like with college students or kids having to talk to their parents, I'm like, the exposure there would be, you avoid your parents or you go upstairs to your room. But how about you actually sit with them? They're watching their K dramas or C dramas or whatever. You sit with them, you may be doing your work, but the exposure of you at least sitting side by side, you might not say anything, because a couple times I'm like, let's slowly get into it, because you want to be able to talk to your parents. Then you just sit next to them, watch their K drama, but you could be doing schoolwork. And that would be exposure. So the actual thing making you anxious, or the thing that you need to manage, whether it's fear of speaking and then snakes or something. Well, what's another reasonable fear of an animal? I'm trying to think. Snakes would be reasonable because I'm scared of snakes, but not to the point that I would freak out. But the more you are in front of it, the more it's in front of you, the more you see it, the less fearful you are, because you know what it looks like. Basically, literally seeing your dad and mom, that may sound like it's nothing to be fearful about, but no, there's some families that can't talk to each other, and kids can't talk to their parents. So that's my way of exposing it. I'm like, slowly. There are some shock factors, sure, but I tend to go, let's go slowly, and it may take you time, but you've got to be in front of it. So if you want to public speak, you have to practice. Get a friend and do it in front of them. And then if that was bad enough, then get two friends. So that would be my definition.
Yeah.
And I think, right, the traditional model of exposure therapy is that it's a graded hierarchy of exposures, right? What Jeanie was saying, where you start small. So let's say you were scared of dogs. So maybe at first we just let you see a picture of a dog, right? And then the next is like, okay, maybe we bring a dog in the room, but there's plexiglass between you and the dog, right? And then slowly you get to the point where you can maybe touch the dog for a second and then 5 seconds, cuddle with the dog. And the idea or the neuroscience behind it is that our minds habituate, and so do our bodies, right? So over time, that exposure is less triggering of the anxiety pathway. And slowly you realize this feared thing or object or event is actually not as bad as you imagine in your head. So that's kind of how I explain it. Yes.
What you said right there is key, because the technical definition is fear is your body's response to an immediate threat, right? That is, a bull is running at my face. I need to get out of the way or fight if I'm really stupid. And anxiety is an imagined, perceived threat. So that is, if I turn this corner, will there be a bull running at my face? And that worked really well in our early days, right? When we had to worry about survival in the wilderness and animals and being attacked in war constantly, right? But in civilization, it's not necessarily as healthy. It's a little bit, too much for our environment now.
I love that. Yeah, the bull. Yeah, run from the bull. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. And
Go ahead,
so
sorry,
for a lot of us, what exposure looks like nowadays is different, because you can't necessarily expose yourself to some of the threats that we perceive are there. Say like financial instability, right? Or financial insecurity. That's not a thing that you can just like how do you deal with that idea, right? And being exposed to that looks different than, say, being like seeing like our classical examples of like animals and whatever, right? And the graded hierarchy of that. So in a sense, a lot of us aren't prepared, even as therapists, to address some of the issues that we have, that we experience in terms of anxiety. So I think one of like a more modern example for us, right, when it comes to these large ideas or these like specters of things like life success or worrying about we'll just use like success in life, like stability. What does that mean for a lot of people? And a lot of the times, like breaking that down and exposing not just the idea, but actually taking that idea and breaking it down into like the core components that really make up the fundamental understanding that we have helps to
I just got to plug in my blouse.
Yeah, helps us shape more of the way that we perceive the world. And I think that's I don't want to say it's a new way. It's more so like it's a different way of approaching the same kind of fear that we've had in the past. It's exposing yourself to the things that the smaller, like everyday things that contribute to this larger idea. So let's take, for example, like succeeding in life, right? If we break down that idea into the steps that lead up to it, right? That anxiety can take many different forms, right? And some of them are more immediate than others. And so moving, like, the graded scale looks a little bit different in the sense that, say, like, if you're worried about the far future, like, what am I going to be doing in 5 years, right? Exposure might look like figuring out what it is that's making you worried about tomorrow. Or, say, like, the thing that's making you worried about the next few weeks, right? So let's break it down. Say you're a college student, right? Use a college student as an example. You're worried about where you're going to be in 5 years, right? If you want to have graded exposure to that 5-year mark, right, you can backtrack and look at next week. Next week, there's a midterm. The week after that, there's a paper. 2 months from now, there's a final, right? And then there's the class that you have to sign up for in a few weeks that you've heard terrible things about, and the professor's terrible, right? And so as we gradually work through some of those steps of what makes us anxious, whether or not we're going to graduate, right? and then like what job we're gonna find, and then until you get to the 5-year mark and you're just like, okay, this is like, after you've broken it down in all those steps and gradually expose yourself to the things that contribute to that big idea that's causing the anxiety, then you start to have a little bit more a sense of control, right? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is either accept that we don't have any control, or come to the terms that we have certain control, that we can certain control over the circumstances that we have, right? And that is usually how I help my clients manage anxiety. And I think I'm getting rambly now, but the idea is that that graded exposure looks a little different in our current situation nowadays.
Sure, definitely. Okay, everything okay there, Chris?
Think so. There we
Oh,
go.
okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, well, just to wrap up, just due to time, I was gonna say one of the things. Tell me what you guys. What do you have a go-to anxiety skill or technique? And my go-to, I start off with honestly, is breathing, deep breathing. And the reason why I kind of crack up when I begin with that is because I, before years ago, when I was first starting my career, poo-pooed on that method, right? The very thing you end up thinking, that's not effective. Why would I do that? I'm too busy to practice deep breathing methods. Turned out to be very beneficial for me, who's the overfunctioner. And I tell people, and I talk about it a lot because it's so simple, but yet not done. Because when you're anxious, what happens to your breathing? It's like you hold your breath, which I find myself doing. Even sometimes listening to you guys, I'm holding my breath, not because I'm anxious, but it's just like, that anticipation. So you're either holding in your breath or you're hyperventilating or over like, breathing, exerting the breathing, which isn't effective. So I say deep breathing kind of regulates, brings that oxygen back to the brain to work. And I'm saying this because I use it a lot, because there are times when I'm just like, I'm not thinking, what did I just say to my kid? Example, because you're mad or you're, escalated stress and you're saying all this and you hold in your breath. Next time, just watch your client when they start talking, especially when you have families, you're just like, they didn't even take a breath in 30 seconds, right? And then they say all this stuff they don't mean. They're like, and then you do this and the team, and I'm like, okay, let's breathe. But yeah, deep breathing. There's so many great breathing techniques, but that's the first thing I'll say. Don't laugh. This takes less than a minute for you to actually get some oxygen and think, and your brain needs that. How about you guys?
Yeah, I also teach that as the primary or the first exercise, really. But especially if it's a cognitive based, anxiety driven kind of thought, then I will do an imagery exercise with them where part of it is just trying to shift the way they relate to the thought. So I kind of make the analogy, like imagine there's a stream kind of flowing in front of you, and that thought, right, is a leaf. It's sitting on the leaf, or it is the leaf. And so imagine that it's coming down into your stream of consciousness, and now you're aware of it, right? Like, I'm worried that my husband will, get hurt leaving the house, right? And so it's a ruminative thought. The likelihood of that is pretty low, but it's very triggering. And so then as the leaf floats across, can you just watch it? Can you observe the thought without jumping in and trying to grab the leaf, trying to engage with it, getting entangled with it? Can you observe your thought? And so that's one of the skills that I'll teach a lot of my clients, because the breathing exercise, right, you kind of do that in conjunction. You're doing the deep breathing while also shifting the way we're engaging with the anxious thought. So yeah, I use that one frequently.
Cool. Chris, Jed.
What about you, Jed?
For me, one of the ones that my go-tos for my clients are different than the ones that I use for myself. It depends on the severity. A lot of times, breathing is obviously foundation, right? But for a lot of my clients, I like to create a place, like a safe space that they go to, like an imaginative space that it requires their senses being taken somewhere else, away from what it is that's causing them the stress. And this is like very early on intervention, right? This is not like this is like before we can get to the place where we're like breaking down your thoughts and your thought processes. It's just getting you to a place where you're calm enough to address some of those ideas. And so one of the things I like to do is like help them to come up with a place that they feel safe and calm, right? And that's breathing, and I usually do like an imaginative thing. I have them kind of imagine they're in this place, and I have them paint this picture for me of where they are, right? So for some of them, it's like the one example is like a mountain, right? If you go to the top of a mountain, say you're camping or whatever, right, and you're looking out over this space, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What's around you? And just having them bring all of their awareness into this like imaginary space helps to get people focused and makes them feel more calm, right? For myself, it's actually muscle relaxation. When I notice myself, so I tense a lot. So I get a lot of like muscle pain when I'm stressed out, and so I need to, for me, is just to just recognize that I'm really tense and just actually just loosen up my muscles. So that usually requires in a certain aspect is deep breathing, right? But it's really just like exhaling and letting my muscles just relax versus just being like tense all the time. So that's something that I do for myself.
For my clients, I think it really depends on what's going on with them. I definitely ascribe to all those different techniques. I use exposure sometimes. I also want to normalize medication. Sometimes you need medication to kind of slow down your neural processes, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But a big thing that I use oftentimes is narrative techniques, right? And that is challenging those intrusive thoughts, the story that you're telling yourself about what you're imagining is going to happen. So before you go and talk to your parents, your anxiety level, what do you think that conversation is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10? You think it's going to be an 8. Well, after dinner, you realize that the conversation was really just a 3. So now you can keep looking at this logbook and understanding that. Running through and talking to your younger self and understanding where those anxieties came from is a lot of work that I do often with my clients as well. But so many different techniques, so many different other solutions out there for anxiety. I don't want anyone to be pigeonholed in any of the things we do, but explore, find out what works for you. I think that's the most important takeaway from this.
Awesome.
All right.
I think we did a pretty good job on anxiety. Again,
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's more we can talk about and we can revisit it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I was going to say, join us for our next episode where we're going to do a series on school and just what that looks like this year, anxiety surrounding school looking different. There's many different aspects, even talking about how it's affected the family, right, with remote learning. And if Jeannie and I can charge her about that. But yeah, we'll start on that next week. Thanks for joining our mental health mukbang, where I'm all done. I ate all my food. I probably have spinach in my teeth. But hopefully we're making mental health easily digestible for you.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you all next week.